And open the meeting of the Pajaro Valley Healthcare District for Wednesday, August 27th, 2025. Rosie, whenever you have an opportunity, please give us a roll call.
Yes. Director Cox? Here. Director Friel? Here. Director Gallagher?
Yeah.
Director Pimentel?
Here.
And Chair Davis.
Here. We had no closed session, so there's nothing to report from closed session today. Any agenda modifications for consideration from staff? Okay, seeing none, I'll move on to the public comment on matters not on tonight's agenda. And yeah, so any public comment on matters not on tonight's agenda will go out online first. Anyone wishing to speak on something not on tonight's agenda?
No hands on.
Okay, anyone wishing to speak on items here? Okay. I will close down the public comment and I will now entertain comments from our board members.
One little comment, I probably should have mentioned this in the other hospital meeting that I've noticed just in the weeds of things. I appreciate the improvement in the packets. I appreciate getting some of the materials in advance. I appreciate getting the PowerPoints in advance. I know that's a lot of work and there's a lot of work you're all doing, and I just see incremental progress. Getting a little more content and the board report. I just want to acknowledge that. It's helpful. So I know it's probably in the weeds and something. The bigger things we're trying to work on, but it's more helpful for us as board members and for the public to follow along. So I want to acknowledge it and appreciate that.
Thanks for that. Any other comments?
Thanks, Rosie.
Okay, seeing no other comments, we'll move on to the consent calendar. We have, I believe, 4 items. We have 4 items on today's consent calendar. It's the minutes approval for our meeting from July 30th and the August 4th meeting. It's the Chief Financial Officer monthly financial performance update that we received during the hospital board meeting. The Pajaro Valley Healthcare District policy approval for August 2025, and also the Pajaro Valley Healthcare District Measure N 2024 General Obligations Bonds, the annual rate setting for fiscal year 25-26. Any questions from the board or staff about these 4 items? Okay, seeing none, I do have to open up to public comment. So anyone wishing to speak on the consent calendar online? Okay, seeing no raised hands. Anyone wishing to speak about these items in person? Okay, seeing none, I'll put down the public comment and I will entertain a appropriate motion.
Approval consent.
Can I get a second?
Sure.
It's okay, I'll second.
Thank you. Take roll on this item. Director Cox?
Yes.
Director Friel?
Yes.
Director Gallagher?
Yeah.
Director Pimentel?
Yes.
And Chair Davis.
Yes. Okay, move on to item number 5. This is the first public hearing requesting public input regarding the composition of potential Pajaro Valley Healthcare District Board election zones. Steve?
Yeah, let me give a brief introduction and then we'll hand it over to Doug, who's from NDC, who's gonna help us with this. But in a nutshell, the California Health and Safety Code requires the district to adopt a by-zone election system, stating that within 5 years of the date of the first meeting of the Board of Directors of the Pajaro Valley Healthcare District, the Board of Directors shall adopt a resolution to divide the district into zones and number the zones consecutively. We also feel like it's going to be a nice way to give representation to people in all corners of the healthcare district. So I don't want to minimize the importance of doing something like this and doing it right and doing it well, and acknowledge that it is a requirement that we do it. So today we'll be conducting our first public hearing and receiving any public input regarding the composition of the healthcare district board election zones. And I'd like to introduce Doug from National Demographics Corporation, who is our chosen consultant that we have brought together to do this for us. He's done this with a number of healthcare districts and other special districts in the state of California, and will walk us through today's process.
So, yes, thank you for the intro and thank you for having me. It is a real pleasure to be working with all of you. While I currently live down in Southern California. I actually grew up in the Aptos portion of your district and went to Aptos High, and my mom taught
Yeah,
at Watsonville
say that.
High for most of her career. So it's great to be working back in my old neighborhood. As was mentioned, we've done this for healthcare districts all over the state. We also recently drew the lines for the city of Santa Cruz when it made its transition district elections, and for the Pajaro Water District as well, along with the Central Fire District. So we've done a lot of work right in this area as well. And we're happy to be working with all of you. So let's jump in with the next slide. So this is by statute a rather dictated process where there are a certain number of hearings that we have to hold at different points. And given the district's young age and interest in engaging its community and existing engagement with the community, we've also added a couple of meetings to the schedule. So today is the first, what they call initial hearing. We don't have draft maps. Those will come later in the process. As you just heard, the goal is to inform residents of this process and hopefully get some input from the public and from you as board members on this process and what should be the building blocks of the election zones that will eventually get drawn. We'll do this first hearing today. That'll be followed by a less formal community forum on the 17th, where anyone interested in the community can just ask questions, have more give and take and back and forth outside of a formal board meeting. Then on September 24th, we have our second also initial hearing. By statute, we do need to do these 2 hearings before there are any draft maps. So on the September 24th hearing, we'll have a little bit of summary of what was discussed at the community forum on the 17th, but otherwise it'll be essentially the same presentation you're getting today. So if residents miss it, but hear about this and they're interested, they can catch up on the 24th and it won't have missed anything. After that, then we get into the mapping process. So after we have the 2 hearings and the community forum, we take whatever input we hear, we take the criteria that I'll talk about in a minute, and we come up with a handful of draft maps for you to consider. And one thing we always emphasize at NDC is our goal is not to give you the best map, the second best map, and the third best map. Our goal is to give you 3 very different maps showing different approaches, that all of which will be fully legally compliant with all the requirements. And then for you as the local residents and ultimately you as the board to choose which approach and mix of neighborhoods and communities makes the most sense for your jurisdiction. So that involves a lot of back and forth. We will release the draft maps at least 7 days before the 3rd hearing, and the 3rd hearing will be on October 29th. Then we'll have again a public forum, an informal forum on November 5th, where people can walk around and look at the maps and we can really dig into the maps and details and neighborhoods. And then there'll be a second discussion, again required by statute, of the draft maps at the board's meeting on November 19th. And if a map has been drawn at that point that the board likes, we can actually do 2 hearings in one meeting. One would be to discuss the maps, and then the second would be to adopt the resolution choosing a map. Or if you're not yet ready to adopt that evening, then looking at the schedule, we don't want to do this in the middle of the holidays, so the adoption would actually be at your January 28th meeting. So that's the schedule. Obviously, there's a lot of opportunity for input, a lot of opportunity for back and forth. And our hope with every one of these projects is that we'll draft the initial maps, but hopefully through public input and board direction and revisions and decisions, they will gradually become your maps and reach what you view as the best map for your jurisdiction. So that's the process. We go to the next slide. These are the criteria. So one thing I should flag, if you talk to folks from other healthcare districts, from other jurisdictions who did this 4, 5, 6, or 10 years ago, the criteria have changed. So there's now what's called the California Fair Maps Act, which only about 2 years ago started applying to special districts. And so 10 years ago, the federal laws were essentially the same. We have to have an equal number of people, and it's total people, not registered voters or anything like that. Total people as counted in the census in each of your election zones. And then we have to comply with the requirements of the Federal Voting Rights Act and make sure that we're not doing any racial gerrymandering. So race cannot be the predominant factor in why a zone is drawn the way it is. So those have been in place for decades. The new rules that came in just a couple of years ago are the California criteria in the middle. The state, by statute, established a priority order saying first, the zones have to be contiguous, meaning all the pieces of a zone have to touch. We must avoid as much as possible the division of neighborhoods and communities of interest. And I'll come back to what is a community of interest in a little bit. Third criterion is to avoid division of cities and census designated places. I will show you a map that includes census designated places. It's the Bureau's way of trying to identify the boundaries of unincorporated areas. And by the Bureau, I mean the Census Bureau. Then number 4 is follow easily identifiable boundaries. This is pretty straightforward. You want to follow the highway or major roads, things that make it easy for residents to know which zone they're in or to talk to each other about which zone they're in. And then the last in this priority order is compact, meaning don't go around one group of people to get to another group of people. Now, keep in mind this is a prioritized order, so you can be non-compact if that's the shape of a neighborhood or that's the shape of a community of interest, a higher ranked criteria. But if there's no higher ranked reason for doing it, you can't bypass one group of people to get to another. Then on the top right, we have also new for special districts, prohibition. We cannot draw election district boundaries for purpose of favoring or discriminating against an incumbent, a candidate, or a political party. For a lot of special districts, this can be a real problem because they have a real problem recruiting board members. And we can no longer look at where board members live and attempt to have each board member in a separate seat. I think as a new entity with a lot of public interest and a lot of public attention, that's hopefully not an issue for you. But it is worth noting that we cannot favor or discriminate against either an incumbent or a candidate who might want to be on the board later on. And then if we end up with 2 maps or more maps that are equal on all those requirements, then you can get into the bottom right, what the courts have called traditional redistricting principles. Things like underpopulating an area that's growing faster than the rest of the district's territory so that it stays balanced for a longer period of time, or any other specific local considerations. But nowadays with those California criteria, we rarely get down into those factors. So a lot of criteria to keep in mind. We'll be going through, and if residents do want to sketch out maps and submit them, we welcome that, and we'll go through them. And if we see a big problem, working with legal counsel, we'll get back to that resident to say, hey, here's a problem. Do you want to fix your map? Or if it looks good, then we'll add it to the mix, and we're happy to include resident drawn maps in the board's consideration. So we go to the next slide. So that's the process and the rules. As you might imagine, in something that's this driven by population data and the Voting Rights Act and things like that, there is a lot of data in this process. I'm not going to go through all these numbers. You've spent a lot of time on your financial numbers earlier in the meeting, and we don't need to go through all these now. But we show this now so that you and residents understand how much data you're going to get about every draft map. So for every draft map and every zone in each draft map, you'll get all this data. There's total population data. There's citizen voting age population data, which also comes from the Census Bureau. That is included because that's what the courts look at as a definition of your eligible voter population. So when we're looking at the Voting Rights Act compliance, we look at those numbers. We'll get data on registration and turnout by ethnicity. The surname data comes from the state of California. They run these numbers to get estimates. One thing to flag, there's Latino estimate and Spanish surnamed estimate. The Census Bureau estimates that in California, about 11% of Latinos are missed, a net of 11% of Latinos are missed by the surname list. So we give you both this California official surname percentage and then the adjusted for that estimated undercount percentage. So you can't add Latino and Spanish. They're two different versions of the same number. And then there's a bunch of other data that tends to go into community of interest definition. Language spoken at home, language fluency, household income levels, education levels, and one that comes up a lot in the bottom right is housing stats. Percent of residents living in rented units versus owner-occupied units. So all this data will be available for every map that we generate. So you can look and see how do these maps reflect the communities and capture the communities that are of most concern to the district. The key number highlighted on the left is that equal population number. So we need to be very close to just over 19,000 people per zone. So every map we're going to check that, and as a rough rule of thumb, you can be plus or minus 5% of that. The legal rule is much more complicated, but the goal is to get well within 5% of 19,000 in each zone. So if we go to the next slide. We can, of course, take those numbers and put them into maps. And so here's one example, and we highlight this one because of the Voting Rights Act, Federal Voting Rights Act concerns that we have to embody when we're drawing a map. And this is showing the percentage of citizen voting age population, or CVAP, that is Latino in each census block in the jurisdiction. And the census block is roughly a city block. Obviously, when you get out in the hills, it's a little different, but in town, it's a city block. And so the yellows and reds are the most Latino areas, and the purples and blues are the least Latino areas. So you can see there's a very different mix in different parts of the district. So we'll have to be sure that when we're drawing maps, we're not overly concentrating Latino eligible voters, and we're not diluting Latino eligible voters. And we've been doing this since 1979. And none of our maps have been overturned on a voting rights challenge. And so we'll keep a close eye on this and be advising you on that question of that balance throughout this process. We did look at similar maps for Asian Americans, African Americans, and Native Americans, who are the other three groups covered by the Federal Voting Rights Act. And there's no geographic concentration of those groups in the district anywhere. So we only have this map for you today. We're happy to share those maps if you want to see them, but they're just all purple. So if we go to the next slide.
Okay.
Yeah. So when we get into defining communities of interest, there's a lot of things that I'll talk about later on that can define that, but some of it is socioeconomics. And so here's some of the data that I showed you put onto a map. And you can see it, you get a lot more variation here than you tend to in the Latino citizen voting age map. But you can see top left is the percentage of households that have a child under age 18 living at home. This tends to be a big concern when we're doing this kind of work with school districts. I don't know how relevant it is to a hospital district, but we do have that data available for you to consider if you do think that's a relevant factor. On the top right, percentage of college graduates, it's a kind of a classic socioeconomic definition of a socioeconomic factor to consider. The bottom right, you can see the renters. So you can see the yellows and reds again are the highest concentrations of renters, and you get that kind of in Watsonville down to the dunes and across the river a little bit. In what's the census designated place of Pajaro, and then less so in the Rio Del Mar and Las Lomas areas. And then bottom left, another kind of classic socioeconomic characteristic to look at is income. And so you can see in each census block group the percentage of households that make $75,000 per year or more. And then again, the reds and yellows are high percentages. The blues and purples are lower. So those are factors that you can consider. You don't have to, but if you do find them relevant to the decisions about your zones, there are the maps, and they're available in an interactive form as well. So if we go to the next slide. There we go. So when I went through the criteria, you may remember number 2 in the state criteria are neighborhoods and communities of interest. And that tends to be where almost all of the discussion takes place. And so, and a little bit of weirdness in the law, there are actually different things. So a neighborhood is purely a geographic neighborhood where you're talking to somebody and say, where do you live? You tell them that neighborhood name. It tends to correlate with census designated places in unincorporated areas, but within a city, it can be very different. So, someone might say Watsonville, or they might give a specific neighborhood in Watsonville. And we'd love to identify those neighborhoods in Watsonville geographically with their boundaries so that we can try to keep each one of those together. And it can be defined however you want, however anyone does. Is it an area around a school, an area between major roads, whatever someone considers their neighborhood. And people who live in the same city block don't have to agree on what is their neighborhood. They can get different definitions, and we'll try to keep both definitions together in a zone as much as we can. So neighborhood's pretty easy. If we go to the next slide, we get into community of interest, which is really a term you only encounter in districting and redistricting. So as the California law defines it, it's a population that shares a common social or economic interest with a key qualifier that should be included within a single district for effective and fair representation. So these are usually areas that have a shared concern and that may struggle to get that concern heard. But it can be any socioeconomic characteristic as well, such as a neighborhood that's particularly full of people with limited English proficiency, who, for example, may push for making sure all materials are bilingual, that kind of thing. So you see some examples listed in the state law. Could be an area particularly concerned about education, safety, particularly for you all, public health. Any of these factors could be the definition of a community of interest. It really comes from you and from the public, and that's what we're looking forward to here. There is one qualifier in the law. The definition cannot include we're a community of interest because we're all in this political party, or we're a community of interest because we're all close to board member so-and-so. It cannot include those types of relationships. It has to be socioeconomic or policy concern. Okay, go to the next slide. So we don't have a lot, there's no formal neighborhoods that I'm aware of in Watsonville, it being the only city that we're looking at. If there are formally defined neighborhoods in the city, I'd love to see a map of those. But I did pull some maps that may reflect some of those concerns. So the city council and the water management agency and the school board all had to consider similar considerations when they drew their maps. So I pulled those maps so you can look at those and see how they're drawn. Obviously, the hospital is a much larger jurisdiction than just the city. But when we're drawing lines in the city, if residents think the districts reflect their communities and neighborhoods well, then we can say, oh, well, let's try to keep District 2 together or District 3 together as much as we can when drawing your election zones. On the flip side, if residents and you don't feel like these are good representations of neighborhoods, that's great. There's no requirement to follow overlapping jurisdictions because their policies and their impact on the community is driven by different neighborhood concerns than yours. For example, the school board members tend to focus very much on the school locations, which is not something that really is going to drive your policy decisions. So that their map may or may not be a good reflection of neighborhoods we should look at. And then I included the satellite image. We can come back to this if there are public comments at this, or more likely at the community forum, where we can really zoom in and see, there are much more urban parts and much more rural parts of the district. And the satellite image is good to use for helping identify those. So lots of ideas to get people talking and thinking, but none of these are official definitions. We're trying to trigger the conversation and get your input and public input throughout this process on what are your neighborhoods and communities of interest. If we go to the next slide. So that's my presentation. I'm happy to answer questions about it, but this isn't just a I present and that's it. We really do want to hear from the board and from the public, if not tonight, at the community forum or at the next hearing, about what are your neighborhoods, what are your communities of interest that we should use as the building blocks as we put together these election zones. And of course, I'm happy to answer any questions about any of the stuff I've covered tonight. So that's my presentation. Again, I'm thrilled to be working with all of you and looking forward to being there in person at some of your later meetings as well.
Thank you, Doug. Any questions from the board? Please start your presentation.
And Doug, what's your last name? And maybe Bill?
Doug Johnson.
Doug's.
And if anyone's a Watsonville High grad from about 15, 20 years ago, Barbara Johnson was my mom, who was the teacher there.
Barbara Johnson.
Worked at Cabrillo.
Doug, no, serious questions. So a couple things, just preference to confirm the obvious. Starting a new district for us, different than redistricting. Starting a new district for us will not force any of us out of our office. We'll be in office until the end of our term and then running under the district. I just wanted to state that as a confirmation I believe to be true, and I think it was stated in the board report. I really appreciate the in-depth of your presentation. It was really helpful to understand. We're gonna have, it'll be an interesting process, I think, to get us where we're going. My questions get to the timelines, adopting a map by January 28th, with everything else going on and how we can be distracted. And I tend to want to get things done, but lately in this particular role, we've always found ourselves needing more time. So I'm wondering, is the 28th kind of back-ended, recognizing that a few of us are going to be running for office in 2026? What can you speak to how the 28th became the kind of the end date, you know, at least our initial timeline?
Sure. It is not a deadline. So if you do decide you want more time after that, you do have the flexibility to add more time on the process. We're really walking through the process of the statutorily required hearings and trying to space them out to match up with your board meetings. There's some weirdness in the statute about the first two hearings have to be within 30 days of each other. And the last two or the third and fourth have to be within 45 days of each other. So that presented some schedule challenges that we've met. But you're exactly right. That January is not a deadline. The real deadline is the county needs the lines. The county would really like the lines in April in order to implement them and get them in place for the November election. So that if you need to go into February, even if you need to go into March, we do have that flexibility. The trade-off is we don't want to add extra meetings just kind of for the sake of it, because we do want candidates to know where the final lines are and to decide if they want to run and where they want to run. So any extra time that we take in this process is less time for the candidates. But there's no hard deadline really until we get to that registrar deadline, which they would love to have it by April.
So some of why I'm bringing that up is there's only about a 3-week gap. I know it's our traditional flow of one board meeting on the 29th and then the next board meeting. November happens to be a short month for us from a board perspective. So there's only 3 weeks between meetings, and get the packet out, you're really talking about 2 weeks. So that's just not a lot of time, I think, for the community to process what happened on the 29th and then adapt to or have feedback on to be ready for, you know, bringing that to our board on the 19th. So I'm expressing that as a concern. And so if we were talking about a second hearing in December, that would feel safer to me, make sure we give our community the space to understand what's going on. I think as a new startup government agency, we've been erring on the side of making sure we're having enough time out there in public and also to tell our good stories when we're out there. So that's just an initial comment. So I appreciate that framework and the importance of getting it done in time to both our elected officials and my fellow friends in the county of Santa Cruz. So I appreciate that.
Let me add one last comment on that. If you look at other districts, many districts are doing this under a legal threat. of a lawsuit, and so they're on a hard deadline under the statute of only 90 days. As was mentioned early on, you're doing this because it's required by your original organizing legislation. So you're not under legal threat, so you don't have that 90-day cutoff that some other neighboring jurisdictions might mention to you.
And then we'll probably dive into a deeper discussion, but my other big picture question was, in the 4 samples that you provided of children under 18, college graduates, renters, and household income, what have you seen other healthcare districts or other healthcare-like districts use as their drivers? And I'm thinking, I think we'll talk about this maybe a little bit more in depth perhaps, but for me, it's the social determinants of health elements that I'd be more wanting our district to reflect that type of weighting. But what have you seen in other healthcare districts? And there's probably not a lot of us that have been formed or have done redistricting recently, but what have you seen as far as what they rely on?
You'd actually be surprised. They're not doing it on the same grounds you are of organizing legislation, but a lot of healthcare districts have received legal threats. And so we've worked with, it might be a dozen now, healthcare districts that have switched. So, and it's very rare for socioeconomic factors to be considered communities of interest for healthcare districts. It really does come down to neighborhoods and cities, or in your case, unincorporated communities in the area, really having different identities. That's the most common consideration we run into. We do share all that socioeconomic data if it comes up, but actually your question touches on a very good thing that I didn't put a lot of emphasis on, which is a community of interest that we look at in zoning is one that benefits from being in a single zone. And a lot of, like, to your point of, at-risk health communities, they may actually be better off being in, if each zone has a neighborhood that is that way, so that every board member is facing those issues in their election and facing that. So there are definite real communities who have real concerns who don't benefit from just being in a single zone. So that's the 2-part question that comes with those community of interest definitions. And ultimately, healthcare districts are rarely looking at something like a city where a city might say, let's put a park in each council district. Well, a healthcare district, you're not going to say, let's put a hospital in each zone. So there is much less of that direct correlation between service and election zones, just because service tends to be consolidated in 1 or 2 locations.
I appreciate that. Thank you.
Any other questions for Doug here? I have a couple questions, Doug. So let's see. I'm interested in if there is a definition of racial gerrymandering, and then just in your expert opinion, what that is and what that looks like.
It is a hotly contested question in many lawsuits. When you get in trouble is when we draw a line specifically following that ethnic map, like that Latino CVAP map that I showed you. If we drew a line because we're following the edge of a red area, that is race becoming the predominant factor. It can certainly be a factor. You can say, hey, I'm concerned about this map because these other maps have 4 Latino majority seats and this one only has 1. That can be one of the factors you're looking at as you consider it, but it can't be the predominant factor. And so, like I said, we've been doing this since 1979 and not had a map challenged on that basis, because we very carefully look at the data, but we don't put that map up and draw around it, which is really when you're getting predominant considerations.
And in your expert opinion, what does that look like? I think an example of that, if you have anything.
Sure, you can see it a lot in if you look at any of the congressional maps that are under federal Supreme Court challenges these days, Louisiana and Alabama and those places, it'll be 80% of a city is in one district, but the area that's a different ethnicity gets carved out and put in a separate district. And the lines go right around that ethnic pocket. And carve that area out of what would typically be considered its community. So if we have an area, if there's a city or a community that is generally wealthy, but there's one area where kind of the service workers tend to live that's lower income, might be less likely to speak English, has very different considerations. Well, those are non-racial community concerns that would justify carving that area into a separate zone. But if you just said, well, most of the city is white and this little neighborhood is Latino, let's carve it out. That's race is your predominant factor, and that's illegal. So really, if you tend to, when you're thinking about should the line go down this road or that road, don't think about race in that decision. You can look at race in the final numbers, but don't say, oh, hey, this is a Latino city block, let's stick it into.
And then, Doug, I think you said that you went to Aptos High School, your mom taught at Watsonville High School. Is that right?
Yes, yeah, class of 1988 at Aptos High.
So then you were right around the time where there was the civil case here in Watsonville that was really the birth of district elections in this region and the state of California. It's the basis of some of the lawsuits that are happening for public jurisdictions. Is that right?
Very much so. That's one of that case, which started when I was in high school and went into when I was in college, kind of piqued my interest in this, and I've been working in this field pretty much ever since.
Yeah, just if you can give us a quick history lesson as to that. I don't want to go down this, because I think Doug and I can talk about this for 20 hours if we wanted to, but just some history of Watsonville's kind of place in district elections and why this is important for Watsonville and this region and really for communities like ours.
Yeah, no, it was definitely a landmark case. Watsonville had citywide elections for decades and decades. And MALDEF, the Mexican American Legal Defense and Education Fund, and a lot of local residents brought a challenge. This is also about the same time as the food processing plant strikes happened back then, about the same time. So it was a highly charged politically time and a time of big change. And traditionally in an area that was that as Latino as Watsonville was even back then, was clearly a federal Voting Rights Act challenge. But what made the case landmark is that Watsonville had consistently had a Latino on the council, but it was a Latino, it tended to be a Latino who was backed by the Chamber of Commerce and the food processing plant owners, not someone who was getting the votes necessarily of the Latino neighborhoods. And so that difference was a kind of a landmark case, and ultimately, in a very complicated ruling that neither side really got everything it wanted, the courts did say that simply having a Latino wasn't enough. It had to be a Latino who was supported by the Latino neighborhoods. And it didn't even have to be a Latino. It had to be a candidate who was winning the votes of those Latino neighborhoods. And it wasn't enough to simply have a Latino on the city council.
Thank you. I appreciate that. I think you did great work over at the city of Santa Cruz as it relates to their challenge that they received, the lawsuit that they were facing because of their failure to move forward with their redistricting. So just wanted to make sure that, as Steve said at the beginning of this is something that is in our articles of incorporation, or as it is a requirement of this district in order to do, but it is also something that we, as good stewards of this hospital and of the district and of the assets that we own for and oversee for the public, something that we should do and that we should take very serious for the overall wellness of our community. My only other question, I might have missed it in the brief, was, so we're going to have these district maps, I think at the end of 26, if I remember correctly, or
They'll be ready for the 26th election.
for the 26th election, and then they will stand through the next redistricting process for us through 2030, is that right? Or every 10 years, right, at the end of the census?
Correct. Yeah, these lines will be used in 26, 28, and 30. Because the census takes place in 30, but the data is not released till 31.
Right,
And so
okay.
we'll get that data and redraw the lines for the 2032 election.
So really, we're drawing the lines and drawing up the zones for the Pajaro Valley of today, but also trying to project what the Pajaro Valley will be like in 28 and 2030 is just as a food for thought for the board as we start to go through this process. So taking into account some of the incoming housing that's coming in downtown Watsonville, some of the additional development that's happening in the Aptos area, the forthcoming rail station that's coming to Pajaro, just over the hill or over the river. So those sorts of things and those sorts of considerations of what do the next 4 to 5 years look like for our community and where are we going to see some of that growth? And it's exciting, I think, for nerds like me, and hopefully you too, Doug.
I'm gonna say, I like you said, I could sit here and talk for 8 hours about this.
Okay, any other questions about this before I open up for public comment? No? Okay, I do have to take public comment for this. Doug, thank you so much for the presentation. Is there anyone online wishing to speak on this item?
No hands online.
Okay, anybody in person wishing to speak on this item? Okay, no other nerds here, and I will now close down the public comment. Thank you, Doug, for the presentation, and we'll see you next month.
Yeah, thank you. And just a quick note, the slideshow at the end, if anybody wants any information, the schedule, the criteria and all that are on drawpajaro.org. So.
Doug, if you can stick around, I'm sorry, I think some of our board members do have additional comments.
Oh, of course.
Yeah, I'm sorry, Doug. I'm a bureaucrat at heart and, fall like, first we start with questions and then public comments and then final board comments. So I was saving some of my comments. So I just wanted to echo, to the extent possible, if we look into the, and they're between 5 and 12, the elements of social determinants of health, that would be helpful to start thinking about as we look at maps, maybe one of the scenarios. To the extent we can lean into that, it covers access to education, access and affordability of healthcare, your economic environment, your built environment, your social support systems. It's kind of all those things that lead to, are you a healthy community? And I think you nailed it. Like when I look at some of these maps, like when I look at the school district, while I understand why they're shaped that way, it would really segregate all of our populations into different groups of people. And I really appreciate your comment about, to the extent possible, because you want them to be together, but to the extent possible that you can have diversity within each district. I think I would expect that to be a valuable element of our board. So if you're able to think through the social determinants of health quadrants and then think of data sets that might feed those different 5 zones, that would be helpful to me.
Yeah, I actually have seen, not in a healthcare district project, but we did a different demographic project that used census data on, they had a different title for it, but it was the exactly the factors you just listed. So we'll pull those and add those to the presentation, definitely.
Yeah, you might go to the World Health Organization's definitions. I'm not sure our federal definitions have stayed static.
Yeah.
I'd worry about editing 6 months.
Yep.
But the World Health has a lot of good data on that.
Okay, any other comments from the board for Doug before we move on?
Thank you.
Okay, cool. Thanks so much, Doug. Appreciate it.
Thank you.
Looking forward to
My
working with you.
I look forward to
Okay.
it. Thank you.
So that'll bring us on to item number 6, and this is our first discussion item of the night. This is the Pajaro Valley Healthcare District External Partnerships. We have a presentation from Steve Gray, and the recommendation before us for the board is to consider and pass a motion to, 1, establish an external partnerships ad hoc committee assign, within that same motion, assign 2 Pajaro Valley Healthcare District board members and appoint a chair. The second is to direct staff to reengage in discussions with external partnership RFP respondents and engage new possible interest in partnering. And 3, requests that the ad hoc committee work with staff to revise the external partnerships RFP guidelines and bring them to the board for ratification in September. Steve?
Yeah, you said it, and I think what I'll do is I'll give a little bit of a brief background on how this conversation came to be, and then I'd love to punt it back to the Strategic Planning Committee of Directors Nunez and Gallagher to talk about what we discussed at that strategy committee meeting. But on August 4th, we had a joint board retreat where one of the items was the study session, moving the Pajaro Valley Healthcare District and Watsonville Community Hospital forward. And we looked at a number of different options as well as the impacts of HR1 that we talked about earlier in the hospital board meeting. And just the joint board retreat included and the study session included looking at different options for going forward, including short-term borrowing, opportunities for immediate cash infusion to pay down debt, government outreach for additional funding opportunities, leasing currently unoccupied land, and reconsidering external partnership opportunities. So that same conversation then came to the Strategic Planning and Marketing Committee meeting of the board on August 14th. And then further recommendations and conversation came out of that. And that's what's coming here in the form of the recommendation that you just read. So I'd love for the 2 of you who are on that committee to give your sort of summary and thoughts on this recommendation and the motion and the next steps. And then if that is agreeable, we can move towards that and let you take over the process of identifying those members.
Joe, would you like to start?
You know what, I have very little to add, actually. I think my overall impression was that our options were fairly limited when I came away from the meeting in terms of. Enough said, I think going back to those
You
conversations.
can project a little bit more, sorry. So
I have my hearing aids in, so I sound like me. Going back to the people we talked to months ago makes a lot of sense to me, with a whole different perspective. To me, the short-term borrowing seems like an essential piece of that, was my sort of impression. And then sort of a longer-term sense, what help the county might be able to afford us, I think is also something of keen interest to me, without any details. Those were the things I came away from that meeting with.
Right.
Back to you.
Definitely. I think I could give it a little bit more background. So, at that meeting, we, as Steve said, took all of the feedback that we received from the strategic planning session that we had, or the study session that we had just the week prior. And in that session, we had various folks from different departments at the hospital, and then also some of our partners over at the foundation, and took all that feedback that we got in that sort of session of what is the next path forward for this hospital, is the next path forward for our community, what is the vision for it, but then also how do we get there and how do we do this in a transparent way that is also the quickest way in which we can resolve some of the financial issues in which we're facing right now, while ensuring that the hospital's here for several decades to come. And so in that strategic session, we, like Steve said, weighed a couple of the different options, kind of teased out some of the initial conversations that we had in that session, and thought about what is in the short term, some of the things that we must do as a board, and that it behooves us to do as a board. And we came out of that meeting with exactly the recommendations that are in front of us right now, which is to establish an ad hoc committee to explore the partnerships and to work in tandem with the administration to look into what is, one, feasible, but then also what is the best fit for this hospital and for our community in terms of the direction that we all want to go in, going forward. I think, as Dr. Gallagher said, you know, some of the options in front of us are limited. You know, just be 100% frank, the options in front of us in terms of long-term viability and also short-term assistance are limited. I think that this allows this ad hoc committee to work very quickly and very closely with the administration to come up with ideas, to engage with potential partners. Both the ones that responded to the previous partnership at the ad hoc committee for external partnerships, the RFP, and then also for any new potential partnerships that could arise from this. Because we're not the only ones in terms of hospitals around the area and other healthcare providers that are facing these sorts of challenges as a result of HR1, and then we'll face additional challenges in the next coming years. And so there could be additional partners here who are interested now and who might not have been interested back when we finished the previous RFP process. And so the recommendation here before us is to establish, like I said, establish an ad hoc committee, get 2 of our board members on here and appoint a chair, and then to direct staff to engage in discussions. And also for this ad hoc committee to work with staff to update the guidelines of which our board approved, I believe, last fall during the first initial RFP process. And so I want to now kind of open it up for questions for the board or from the board of the strategic planning committee, and then also of Steve and staff about either one of those 3 recommendations, and then also what the path looks like going forward, or any additional questions you have around this. Any questions? And I do want to open up to public comment, and then we'll come back to discuss after questions, but anything? Yeah.
Timeline, is there, I know this is a discussion item, is there any thought on the timing in which this ad hoc committee would want to complete its work and come back to the board?
That's a really great question.
Probably highly urgent.
I have one thought on that, if I may, and that is that I think the ad hoc committee should meet as soon as possible to talk about the guiding principles. And then potentially bring those back to the full board in a special session so that we don't wait until the end of September to have those in place. Because I need, if there are going to be updates to those guiding principles, I need those in order to really get into any kind of conversations with potential partners. So I would anticipate within the next 1 to 2 weeks that we could complete that portion of it. The other portions are going to be dependent upon potential partners, dependent upon what the partnership might look like and legal things involved in all that. So I can't predict any of that, but in terms of the getting started, I would say within the next couple of weeks, we need to get that done.
Thank you. Yeah, so realistically, I think, Marcus, in terms of both for transparency for the public and then also just transparency for the board as well, the ad hoc committee will be meeting quite regularly over the next month, if not once a week, then probably twice a week in some instances, to help guide the administration in terms of what are the next steps. And then as a full board, we'll likely meet anywhere from 2 to definitely 2 times this month, or next month in September, if not 3, in special sessions to move things along and to be able to ensure that it's not just the 2 members who are appointed to the ad hoc, but the entire board who has an understanding and is fully bought into whatever it is the next path forward might be. So, any other questions, or Joe, anything else you'd like to add?
No.
Okay. If there's no other questions, I'll open up to public comment on this item. Anyone online wishing to speak on this item?
No,
Anyone in person, please?
may not know the right format, so I know I can't ask questions.
You can ask questions, and then after public comment's done, we'll come back and we'll answer.
As we're newer member here and new to this structure, when the term ad hoc committee is often used, it seems that there's a lot of duplicity in membership in ad hoc committees within the district boards. And in terms of this, when I think of ad hoc committee in regards to these large decisions and in terms of this RFP, my encouragement would be to engage alternative members or alternative discussion with it to people that perhaps weren't included in the initial discussion because we had marginal success with the first round, and not due to effort and not due to design, but I think that we're growing and evolving what we need as a hospital and involving different stakeholders in that outside of what we often have, because we might bring a little bit of a different level of discussion and some ideas to.
Thank you. Anyone else wishing to speak on this item? Okay, seeing none, I'll bring it back to the board for discussion on these items, and I think, Noel, we can take all three of them at the same time, or we can choose to split them up and have individual votes. I'm wondering if you have direction on which one is preferred.
I would take them individually just because I don't have a feeling yet for what the board might want to do. Does that make
Okay.
sense?
Yeah, I think so too. I think, I'm not, I think we can definitely do number one and number two, as, quick discussion items, I think. And then number three, I'm wondering if, we have the 15 guiding principles that we can pull up in front of us, Rosie, so that we can at least get initial thoughts, from the board to guide that ad hoc committee that is going to be shortly appointed and staff in terms of the discussion, how that discussion might go in their first meeting. So they could get a head start essentially. Does that sound okay, Noel? Am I making you nervous or is that?
No. No, that's fine. So I guess the first item of business would be to get volunteers for the ad hoc committee.
Yep, yes. So I'll start and I'll just say that, I will volunteer to serve on the ad hoc committee once again, or not once again, but on this new ad hoc committee. Both serving as board chair and then also being a part of the previous ad hoc committee and conversations with potential partners. I think that I bring that experience and also the context of how the initial conversations went as well. And so I would like to be appointed to this ad hoc committee if that's something that the board will entertain as well. And I'm obviously open to any other volunteers.
I'm interested in being on the ad hoc committee. I think, for a few reasons. One, I'm new to the board, so I don't have my own, group yet, but also I'm very passionate about this topic. And, I think it's important to really look at it from a lot of different perspectives.
I just got a voice in my ear saying that we first have to create that on.
I think so.
I think we can all have the same, all in one. Yes.
You could do that. You could do that all in one, create it and appoint the people.
Could also volunteer, given my experience prior and understanding the context has shifted from what we did a year ago to what we're currently doing, so. Or what we're currently going to be tasked with.
We have 3 volunteers.
I mean, I was gonna say I volunteer myself and I really appreciate Alex, your interest in, so I would strongly prefer to you. Appreciate your willingness to join and bring the energy perspective.
Did you say you're volunteering
I-
as well?
I'm willing to, but I would like to defer that
Yeah.
volunteerism over to my fellow board member, Alex. Really grateful to hear your interest.
Okay, so we have 4 of us, is that right?
I'll
Go with 3.5, is that right?
I'll resign to my, just keep it simple.
I just want to express my support for this process. I think it's so important and especially in this pivotal moment, like healthcare is the ultimate team sport and we cannot go alone. And I was gonna ask Tony to volunteer to be the chair of the ad hoc committee, so thank you for kicking us off as the first volunteer. And thank you to everyone for volunteering. I am not volunteering. Happily deferring to your expertise.
Okay, so we have 3 volunteers, here, the motion is to establish a committee assigned to Pajaro Valley Healthcare District board members and appoint a chair. So I believe we make a motion here as a team, and then vote on it. So is there anybody who wants to make a complete motion of that with the committee, the 2 board members, and then also the chair or the 3 board members who have volunteered?
I'll move a motion that we do establish the ad hoc committee. I echo my fellow board member comments about appointing Tony to be the chair. I think I'm at a spot where I'm leaning to appreciate board member Field's interest in joining, so my motion is to appoint board member Field to join ad hoc with Chair Tony Denise.
Is there a second for that?
I'll second.
Okay, I'm just, so Noel, well, we can go into discussion first, I suppose. Any discussion on that motion before us? Discussion. I'll just say thank you for the vote. Thank you for the trust. I think from both of you for making the motion and for seconding the motion. Obviously still has to go to a vote. I think that as we said earlier in the presentation, there are good options in front of us, but the options are not, there are not many in terms of the path forward. And so I think that while this ad hoc committee, I think, is going to do, whoever is appointed to it is going to do really great work. I also think that the path forward is really straightforward for this ad hoc committee in terms of what is in front of us and the steps that we need to take and how quickly we have to move. And so just appreciate that trust. And I think in the previous iteration of this, of our external partnerships ad hoc committee, we felt like we had time. We felt like we had a lot of time to go out to do the public education that we could and to take in that feedback and to really come back and weigh all the different options in front of us. And now I think the options are a little bit more limited and the time is definitely more limited. And so, I take the public feedback and I acknowledge that the last time that this process went through, it dragged on for one reason or another. And I know that in the state that we're at right now and just what we're looking at in terms of what's coming in front of us and what'll be waiting for us in 2026, we think everyone in the room understands that we have to move quickly and that we have to move with intent. And so if I am appointed to the committee, if I am appointed as chair, as the motion is, I promise to do that. I promise to devote as much time as possible to move this forward and find us a new path. So. Any other comments or before I ask Rosie to take a motion or to take a roll? Okay, Rosie, whenever you're ready.
Just to restate the motion, the committee would be made up of directors Nunez and Friel with Chair Nunez at the chair of the committee, correct?
Mhm.
Okay. I'll take roll on this item. Director Friel? Yeah. Director Cox?
Yes.
Director Gallagher?
No,
Director Pimentel?
Yes.
And Chair Nunez.
Yes. Okay, so item number 2 is, or I'm sorry, the second part of the motion is direct staff to reengage in discussions with external partnerships, RFP respondents, and engage new possible interests in partnering. And I think, just for, as a discussion, I think it would be good to go over who submitted a response the last time, what the response was, and then also if there's any feedback on who that might be in terms of the new potential, options or partners that we might reach out to. That would be a good time right now for the board to have that input for Stephen and the ad hoc committee. And so, Steve, I hate to put you on the spot, but if you got it in front of you. For the external partners, for the RFP respondents for the first time around.
What's your question, sorry?
Can you go over the first respondent?
What kind of responses we got?
Yes, yeah. Oh, Marcus has them here for me. So, through the initial RFP process, we had, Salud para la Gente, submit in response for a potential collaboration on HR systems and services. Common Spirit Health, practicing, healthcare here as Dominican Hospital, submitted a, response for management services agreement. Kaiser Permanente, submitted a response for a potential lease and build out of the shelled space medical office building, space on the first floor of 65 Nielsen Street. And then Sutter Health, submitted a management services agreement as well. And the management services agreement varied in scope for both Common Spirit and Sutter, but, we're essentially bringing in, their own operations and running the day-to-day operations of the hospital, for the healthcare district. So those were the 4 that submitted, thank you, Marcus, that submitted, proposals the last time around. I believe the board, off the top of my head, said that we would write a thank you, but, not the right time letter to Salud para la Gente, and we'll move forward with that. We then also decided, to say thank you, but not the right time to Common Spirit and to, Sutter Health, and then, decided to move forward with the potential, lease proposal that was put in front of us by, Kaiser Permanente. And so, of those 4 responses, it's to my knowledge that Kaiser Permanente, that, potential partnership and that expansion and the lease agreement discussions are underway on that already and on, other items as well. The other 2, Common Spirit and Sutter, being ones that I think that, in this direction to staff, that, the board can determine whether or not we want the administration to re-engage with those 2 potential partners. So yay to both, yay or nay to one or both or either, I suppose is. Yes. Yes.
Yeah.
And is there any additional potential partners that we might see? I know, Dr. Gallagher, you mentioned a couple in your opening comments that might be a part of the second round of,
the only thing I remember is that UCSF has been somewhat elusive. But that's the only additional.
okay. So with that, I think we can, tee up item number 2 for, I can tee up item number 2 for a, adequate, motion here for the rest of the board.
Make a motion.
Yeah, so.
Okay, I'll make a motion to re-engage in discussions with external partnerships that we had just discussed.
I'll second.
Thank you. I'll take roll on this item. Director Cox?
Yes.
Director Friel?
Yes.
Director Gallagher?
Yes.
Director Pimentel?
Yes.
Yes. Okay, so item number 3 is request that the ad hoc committee work with staff to revise the external partnership RFP guidelines and bring back to the board for ratification in September. I think as a starter here for the board, it'd be good to just have a quick refresher as to what the guidelines were that we approved back in November, if I remember correctly. And if there is any initial thoughts, conversation about the guidelines, would be helpful for the ad hoc committee to receive that before their first meeting. So, I can read them out loud, or we can all yeah, I guess I can read them out loud. So number one was that arrangements must align with the mission, vision, and values of the district and Watsonville Community Hospital. And feel free to stop me at any time. And if we want to discuss one. Number two was only arrangements that support and maintain the integrity and independence of the district and hospital corporation will be considered. Number three, our arrangements must prioritize clinical integration through physician recruitment and service line expansion, financial stability, and achieving economies of scale where appropriate, and upgrades to supporting technology. Number four is the name Watsonville Community Hospital must remain unchanged throughout and after the term of any arrangement, although a branding strategy that would show an affiliated external partner would be considered. Number five is any arrangement needs to enhance relationships between and among Watsonville Community Hospital and its stakeholders, including the community and patients served by the hospital, its physicians, and its employees. Number six, arrangements must honor existing union contracts and maintain Watsonville Community's hospital commitment to the support and growth and development of its clinical and non-clinical staff. Number seven, the district and Watsonville Community Hospital must maintain ownership of all real and personal property assets throughout and after the term of any arrangement. You can scroll down, Rosie. I think we're halfway through. Number eight, any arrangement shall not dissolve the district or hospital corporation board of directors. Number nine, any proposal shall not outsource the hospital corporation senior level management team or diminish its authority. Number 10, we will continue to provide the same level of information to the public, allowing further input into the future direction of the district and hospital. Number 11, any arrangement must contain appropriate protections to ensure the continued success and independence of the district and hospital corporation at the end of any term. I think there's three more. Yeah. Number 12, the economics of any arrangement must fairly recognize the value of the contributions of Watsonville Community Hospital to the arrangement in relation to the values it receives. And number 13, multiple arrangements must be explored and affected, or multiple arrangements may be explored and affected at any one time. And then the last two are that we cannot jeopardize measure and bond covenants and our existing legislation that stood up the district and hospital back in 2022. And so I think it would be good for the board to go over some of these now, and instead of knocking them off as yay, nay, I think if there's any one, two, or three that really resonate with you, that throughout this process, we understand that we have to be more flexible than we were when we were putting these together. That these are your must-haves, and giving that sort of feedback for the ad hoc committee to begin the conversation in that, with that skeleton, I guess, or better. Please.
I'll just
Rosie, can you scroll back up?
let's jump in and say at our August 4th retreat, joint meeting retreat, I know we provided some initial response to that. So I encourage going back to those notes. And part of my comments are derived based on, we developed these before going out to RFP, and when out to the RFP, and I think the report back was in discussing some of these things with interested parties, there were some clear hurdles. And so I would actually defer to the ad hoc committee and staff to come back and, with that knowledge of where those hurdles were at, and come back to the board at a special meeting to really make a recommendation of what might have to be modified with the framework in mind of, based on the feedback that we got last time. I would be willing to entertain that. I mean, there's some of these that, like, we shall not dissolve the district, and there's no doubt about that.
Yeah, right.
But the things that are more nuanced, I'd be curious to see what staff and ad hoc brings back versus and going through it right now without not having that kind of intimate insight.
I agree with you, and I think one of the things that came out of the August 4th was really, we kept going back to the mission and vision and like the mission and vision. And I think if the ad hoc committee looks at it through the mission and vision, because our goal is to make sure that our community has access and that we maintain supports for everybody here. It's hard to go through each one and say, well, that one's more important than another, because I think if we looked at the RFPs and said, well, this would be a better option, but it does infringe on it. I don't know. I think it's harder to do that. I agree. We would need to bring it back to the board to discuss based on the mission and vision if it goes away from that.
I'd just be interested to know how we can do
Sorry,
this.
sorry.
Oh, sorry.
No, go ahead.
Just more expansive, right? Like, we're not in a place where we can be restricted. So how can we expand the possibilities? So things like in number 2, independence, maybe that needs to be thought about. Or things in number 4, maybe it doesn't have to be exactly that name. I'm not saying these as suggestions, I'm just saying them as examples. Or the one, number 9, also, in terms of like senior level management team. I think there just needs to be flexibility and expansive growth mindset thinking in these. It doesn't mean that any of those things necessarily are gonna need to happen, but I don't think we're in a place where we can take anything off the table on some level. Assuming that we're caring for the people who live here, right? Like
Right.
the core mission.
Joe?
I sent an email to Steve and Tony with my thoughts about these. Many of them became irrelevant. The real sticking point in the prior discussion was operational control. Both Sutter and Dominican basically wanted some variation of operational control, and to me, that seems like it's a necessary part of having one of them. Come. Here. And I hope and trust that my thoughts would get forwarded to the ad hoc in the process.
Definitely. Okay, any other thoughts? Or any other questions at this time? We do have to pass a motion on that the ad hoc committee come back to the full board with any revisions. I expect there will be, but revisions to the to these guidelines.
I move the motion with the stipulation that if possible, if we can schedule a special board meeting no later than the 17th and ideally no later than the 12th. I realize schedule's tiny.
I would say no later than 12, although
Yeah, I'm here.
Like the 10th.
Here every day but Labor Day. I can come in Labor Day.
I was gonna say.
I can come in that
We
night.
might need you.
I come in that night.
Okay, and so the motion is,
But I think I'm trusting that the ad hoc will take this input, work with staff and, I think your first meeting will be illustrative about how fast you can move.
Yeah.
And schedule on the 10th, it's the 10th, right? But the ad hoc can make that determination. I would say no later than the 17th, preferred by the 12th.
okay, do I have a second?
We got this.
Second.
I got service. Thank you. I'll take roll. Again, I had Director, who was it, that first Pimentel and Cox, is that correct? Thank you. All right, Director Cox?
Yes.
Director Creel?
Yes.
Director Gallagher?
Yeah.
Director Pimentel?
Yes.
Attorney.
Yes, okay. Thank you. That brings us to item number 7, it's the Philips CT Services Agreement. And that is, I believe, the same agreement that came to us for the hospital meeting.
It is, yeah, and we're bringing it here as a sort of a belt and suspenders check, just to make sure we know we did this. This is going to be a hospital expense. And it's also integrally related with the Measure N district funded project of the new CT and the new MRI machine. So we wanted to bring it here for a secondary approval. Any other questions from the district board? Just because it is related to that ultimately district funded project. So it will be operationally funded by the hospital.
Okay, any questions for Steve? Seeing no questions, I will now open up the public comment for item number 7. Any raised hands online? Any hands? Okay, I'll close down public comment for item number 7 and I'll move on to item number 8. Oh, I'm sorry.
I'll move it.
Sorry.
I'll pass the motion recognizing the lengthy discussion during our hospital board meeting. Motion.
Make the motion.
Make a motion.
I'll second.
Thank you. I'll take roll on this item. Director Cross,
Yes.
Director Friel,
Yes.
Director Gallagher.
Yes.
Director Pivot,
Yes.
and Attorney Good.
Yes.
I'm gonna recuse myself before number 8.
Yes.
Thank you, everyone. Thank you. And it's the last one.
See how well trained you have your board members, Noel?
I know, Dr. Cox, can you just state for the record what your conflict is regarding this? That you're
Yes, Salud is my employer.
perfect. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Have to wait until she leaves the room.
Oh.
Sorry.
So give me a minute to queue up my notes. All right, you ready for me?
Okay, yes, we're ready for number 8, the lease agreement with Salud Para la Gente.
Great, so item 8 is a recommendation to pass a motion to approve the lease of 20,000 square feet to authorize staff to execute the lease and to authorize us to make any required post-closing filings as they may determine might be necessary through the Attorney General. So a little background, Salud has leased this 20,000 square feet. It's at 45 Nielsen on the street side, the Nielsen Street side of the campus since 2016. And that lease has been amended a few times and adjusted renewal options to extend the lease term. Those went through 2025. And so we are we now have this is proposing a new lease with them with a new 10-year effective date with one 5-year renewal option at the end of it. The base rate would be $28,600 per month, $1.43 per square foot with 2.5% annual increases, plus operating expenses at 45 cents per square foot and escalating annually by 2.5% also. The tenant, Salud, is planning to undertake approximately $4.65 million in improvements at its cost. So that will enhance the value of the property itself. They have some grants to be able to do that. And so they're looking forward to being able to do that. That will be able to provide more exam rooms and just better use of the space. Some of the space has really wide hallways that are not really a great use of space, so they could add some more exam rooms and take care of more patients, which is great for our community. All the terms have been negotiated at fair market value and are not based on volume or the value of referrals. And Julie and I are happy to answer any questions you have about it.
Any questions for
Working
Steve
hard
or
on
Julie?
this with them.
Just a question about, and I'll come back to the comment. I think I know the answer, but I'll put it out there. Was there any discussion about prepayment of lease terms, prepaying the first 3 years, 5 years, 10 years? Any discussion along those framework?
We have not had that discussion with them on this particular lease.
Thank you.
Any other questions for Steve or Julie about this? Okay, I do have to go out for public comment on this, so. Anyone wishing to speak on item number 8? Online? Okay. No hands raised. Anyone in person wish to speak on this? Seeing none, I'll close down the public comment and I will entertain a motion for item number 8.
I'll move staff's recommendation. And then pause to allow feedback from board members and staff about adding a recommendation or authorization for staff, should Salud be interested and should the hospital want to pursue this, that staff are authorized to offer a 10% discount on prepayment of a 10-year lease. If that's something of value to Salud, might be a value to the hospital. So pre-authorize a negotiation that would allow for a prepayment discount of their lease. So over a 5-year lease, a 5-year prepayment, 5% discount.
In the lump sum that would come.
Lump sum. And as I think about that,
We can take that recommendation and we'll take it back to council, because this is a provider, and so we have to make sure that we're not giving undue benefits to a referral source, so we can see what the parameters are around that.
I would reframe my motion and say it authorize up to a 15% discount. But trust staff and work with that. So I'm moving staff recommendation with adding an option to authorize staff to negotiate and execute a prepayment discount up to 15% for prepaying 10 years, and then proportionally less if it's a 5-year prepayment, that's the 7.5% discount. That's my motion.
That's the motion.
Is that clear, staff?
Yeah, it is to me.
Thanks. Can we get a second, or are there any questions about that motion or any clarification needed?
I'll second.
All right, thank you. I'll take roll on this item. Director Cox is recused. Director Creel,
Yes.
Director Gallagher,
Yeah,
Director Pimentel,
Yes.
and Henning.
Yes. Okay, that brings us to the end of tonight's meeting, so I will adjourn us. Thank you.